The man in the hallway was shirtless, hair damp from a recent shower, walking barefoot across imported hardwood as if it belonged to him. His hand trailed the banister lazily before he descended the stairs, humming tunelessly like he hadn't just spent the night with another man's wife. His name was Daniel. And in this house, my house, he acted like the landlord. I stood in the kitchen, pouring jasmine tea into a porcelain cup Margaret had ordered from Paris last spring. I didn't look up when Daniel entered. Just placed the cup neatly on the tray, alongside a small dish of sugar cubes, Margaret's favorite. Daniel yawned. "Robert, any chance we've got almond milk? Maggie's stomach gets weird with regular." I gave him a faint smile. "Second shelf, left side." He patted my shoulder on the way past me, like I was the help. "You're the man." I suppose I was. The moment he disappeared back into the living room, I took a moment to check the angle of the sugar dish, rotating it until the tiny silver tongs rested perfectly between the two ridged handles. Then I lifted the tray and walked it out like nothing in the world was wrong. Margaret was sprawled across the velvet sofa, silk robe slipping off one bare shoulder, legs draped over Daniel's lap like she was posing for a magazine spread. Her hair was damp too, a few strands sticking to her collarbone. She didn't look at me when I entered, not right away, only when I placed the tray on the coffee table and began pouring her tea. "Thanks, honey," she said, finally meeting my gaze. Her eyes glittered, mocking. "You're getting really good at this. You sure you don't want to apply to a hotel chain?" Daniel chuckled and bit into a biscotti. Margaret took a sip, then said lightly, "You know, Robert, you should try it too. Maybe a young and pretty girl could help you feel like a man again." Daniel choked on his bite. I didn't flinch. "Wait, yeah. Who knows," she added, swirling her tea. "Someone out there might still think you're worth seducing, even with that tired expression." I bowed my head slightly. "That's kind of you to say." Margaret's robe shifted again, exposing more thigh than necessary. I adjusted my tie, not because I was flustered, but because I was checking the time. Because what Margaret didn't know, what Daniel could never imagine, and what neither of them could see behind the quiet smiles and lowered eyes, was that I'd already hired a private investigator 6 months ago, that I'd already transferred most of our joint assets. That every phone call, every bank withdrawal, every little lie about business trips and late meetings had been documented, labeled and time-stamped. I was never meant to win this marriage, but I would win everything else. So I smiled again. Watched Daniel feed her a bite of mango from the silver fruit plate I bought. Watched Margaret lick his fingers in slow, exaggerated movements like a schoolgirl in a bad drama. They thought I was weak, they thought I'd break first. What they didn't understand was, I stopped breaking a long time ago. They just hadn't seen it yet. The wedding had been perfect, at least, that's what everyone said. The venue was a lakeside estate in autumn, with golden leaves drifting through crisp air and violins humming something elegant and forgettable. Margaret wore an ivory satin gown tailored to worship her figure. I stood beside her in a charcoal suit, hands folded neatly at my front, smiling as she recited her vows. Her voice was steady, warm, almost convincing. People cried. Her mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue embroidered with her name. The guests whispered, "They look so good together." "He's lucky." "She's marrying down, but at least he's smart." They were right about one thing. I was smart. Even then. I remember the moment she slipped the ring on my finger. Her hand trembled just a little, not from nerves, but calculation. She was locking in a partnership, not a romance, and I was playing my part with precision. A rich man with clean shoes and a spotless past. The kind of man who made a good chess piece. In photos, we looked like a power couple, she with her high cheekbones and perfect makeup, me with my composed smile and tired eyes. Our friends reposted our wedding reel for months. #perfect match. #CEO queen. #from rivals to lovers. They didn't know Margaret had once dated my mentor, or that she only agreed to marry me after Lou Corporation signed the merger. They didn't know she didn't kiss me after the cameras went off. They didn't know I didn't mind. At first, Margaret was careful, cold, but civil. She was always dressed for events, never for me. I'd come home to the faint scent of perfume and empty wine glasses on the balcony. She'd sit at her vanity, scrolling through her phone while I removed my tie behind her. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Long," she'd reply without looking up. By the second year, she stopped replying. I think the first time I noticed something off was when I overheard her ugging on the phone in the guest bedroom, a soft, flirty tone I hadn't heard since our engagement photo shoot. I pushed the door open without knocking. She turned sharply, eyes wide. "Robert, I'm on a call." The man on the other end hung up instantly. She said it was a supplier. I didn't argue. 3 weeks later, I came home early and found the bodyguard she'd hired, tall, ex-military, dumb as a brick, leaning a little too close over her shoulder as she arranged jewelry in the living room. She didn't flinch when I walked in, didn't even bother explaining. Later that night, I asked, "Did you ever love me?" Margaret lit a cigarette with a manicured hand. "That's a stupid question, Robert. Don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said quietly. "I just want to know what I meant to you." She looked at me over her shoulder and smirked. A very useful stepping stone. I slept in my office that night, but I didn't leave. I started documenting. The first time I met Melissa, it was during a company acquisition review. She was on the junior legal team, quiet, almost invisible, except for the way she watched everything. Not the way most did, not with envy or hunger. She watched like someone who remembered details no one else thought mattered. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, she lingered at the door. "Mr. Hale?" I turned. She hesitated. "You should be careful with Lou Corp's equity terms, and with who you let into your personal accounts." I frowned. "You're talking about Margaret." Her eyes dropped. "I didn't say that." She left before I could ask more. Later, I checked the paperwork. She was right. A clause had been slipped in under an emergency revision by Margaret's legal team, one that gave her control over a key trust fund if I failed to meet certain marriage stability metrics. It was a sham clause dressed up in corporate language. That's when I remembered Melissa's voice, calm, neutral, not warning me out of bitterness, but out of quiet decency. The next week, I brought her coffee during a contract review and asked her what she thought of power. She said, "True power is knowing when not to use it." I liked that. Margaret didn't notice me watching Melissa after that. Or if she did, she didn't care. By year 3, Daniel had replaced the bodyguard. He was younger, flashier, dumber in a different way. The kind who wore designer cologne and fake humility. He started showing up to the house in tighter shirts, making jokes about our arrangement. I didn't stop him. He thought I was weak. Margaret laughed when he kissed her in front of me once. "You're not going to say anything?" I said, "Why would I?" She raised a brow. "Jealous?" "No," I said, sipping my tea. "Bored." They didn't understand what that meant, not then. But I had already moved most of my assets offshore, already started collecting digital evidence, tracking Margaret's login history, Daniel's location pings, VPN traces from her hotel stays. I had Melissa revise the prenup quietly under the guise of a will restructuring. She didn't ask questions, and I didn't give answers. They think the man who says nothing has nothing to say, but I say nothing because I already know how it ends. Dinner was already served when Daniel arrived. I had arranged the table with quiet precision, wine glasses polished, steak plated medium rare the way Margaret liked it, and candles flickering softly in the center like some mockery of romance. Daniel walked in like he belonged there, jacket slung over one shoulder, smug grin pasted on his face. Margaret followed behind, her laughter loud enough to echo down the marble hallway. She didn't even glance at me as she slid into her seat. "You outdid yourself tonight, Robert," Daniel said, sniffing the air theatrically. "Do I smell rosemary? Classy." I handed him a napkin. "Thyme and garlic rub. Margaret prefers it that way." Daniel winked. "You're spoiling her." Margaret smirked and crossed her legs. "He's useful, if nothing else." I poured her wine. "Is that what I am now?" She took the glass without looking at me. "You were never much else." She took a sip and leaned back in her chair, surveying me like an antique she'd grown tired of owning. "Honestly, Robert, you've gotten comfortable, and comfort is dangerous for men like you." "Men like me? The kind that need someone else to give them purpose." Daniel chuckled, but fell silent when I met his eyes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Later, as I cleared their dishes, I noticed a pale pink lipstick stain on Daniel's collar, not Margaret's usual shade. That was coral. This one was softer, more youthful. Someone else then. Interesting. I made a mental note. When I returned with dessert, Margaret was scrolling through her phone, her face lit by the screen's glow. "You should check the quarterly report," she said casually. "We're down again, blame the market." "I reviewed the books last night," I replied. "The drop isn't market-driven, it's misallocation." She didn't look up. "I already told the board it was a supply chain bottleneck." "That wasn't in the report." "Because I didn't submit the real one." I paused. "So you lied?" Margaret shrugged. "I massaged the truth. That's what people do in business, Robert. You wouldn't understand." Daniel chuckled again. "Don't be hard on him, babe. He's still new to playing dirty." I stared at the melting chocolate on the plate. "Is that why you moved 20 grand from the Lou Trust into a shadow account last month? Was that massaging too?" She blinked, then smiled. "You're finally paying attention. Good. Maybe you'll grow a spine." She rose from her seat, walked around the table, and pressed her lips to Daniel's cheek. "Darling, let's take dessert upstairs." Daniel grabbed his wine and followed her without a word. I remained at the table, the empty fork still in my hand. I didn't eat that night. But I printed the trust transfer. The next morning, I received a call from one of the partners at Crown Holdings. Margaret had told them I was taking a mental health sabbatical due to stress and wouldn't be handling any negotiations this quarter. Apparently she had forwarded a doctor's note. One I had never written. "Just take your time," the partner said, awkward over the line. "Your wife said things have been hard." Yes, they had. Later that week, I attended a fundraising gala for a university research endowment. Liu Corporation was a sponsor. Margaret didn't bother to show. I went anyway. It was at the rooftop of the Bellhurst Hotel, city lights shimmering beneath a glass canopy. I wandered through clusters of guests, letting conversations drift by like static. Then I saw her. Melissa. She was dressed simply in a satin slate-grey dress, her hair tied back in a low twist. She wasn't surrounded by sycophants. In fact, she stood slightly off-center from the rest, alone, quietly sipping sparkling water from a slim glass. She noticed me. "Mr. Hale?" "Melissa," I smiled. "Didn't expect to see you here. I'm covering for my uncle. He's a trustee on the advisory board." Her tone was polite but guarded. "You clean up well." She didn't blush. She didn't smile either. She just said, "You look tired." I raised my glass. Occupational hazard. We stood in silence for a moment, then I asked, "Tell me something, why did you warn me back then?" She looked at the skyline, eyes distant. "Because you weren't stupid, and I don't like watching clever people pretend to be blind. Sometimes pretending is safer." Melissa glanced at me. "Or maybe it's just lazier." I studied her. She wasn't wearing any jewelry, except for a tiny ring on her right hand, plain, silver, unassuming. She spoke again. "Everyone keeps saying you've changed, but I don't think you have, you just stopped hiding." That caught me off guard. She took a sip, then added, "Your wife's lover, Daniel, he's been flashing a Liu Foundation card around campus, claims he's their youth ambassador." I chuckled. "Is that so?" "People talk, and I listen." Her voice was steady, clean. She didn't ask for anything, didn't imply anything. But I realized in that moment, she was useful. Not in the way Margaret used the word, but in the way chess players think 4 moves ahead and need someone to hold the board steady. So I offered her a seat beside me for the rest of the evening. She took it without hesitation. And Margaret. That night, I came home late. She was asleep on the couch, phone buzzing beside her with texts from Daniel that read, "You forgot your lipstick, is he still clueless?" I tucked the phone under the cushion, adjusted the blanket, then walked upstairs to sleep in the guest room, alone, again, but not for long. The bed was too large. I used to think king size meant comfort, luxury, success. Now it just meant empty space, a metaphor with edges. I lay there most nights in a suit I never changed out of, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded across my chest as if waiting for the coroner. The house was quiet at night. Always quiet, except for the sound of Margaret's laughter from the guest bedroom or the clink of wine glasses when she thought I was asleep. Some nights, she didn't come home. Some nights, Daniel did. I never asked where she went. She never offered an answer. I used to reach for her in my sleep. Now I reached for my phone. Not to call her, just to scroll through my notes, transaction records, emails she thought she'd deleted, shadow wire transfers to accounts she assumed I'd never trace. This wasn't a home anymore, it was a museum, each room a still frame of betrayal. The dining room, where she once fed Daniel a piece of steak with her fingers. The balcony, where she told me she was outgrowing this marriage. The bathroom mirror, where I saw lipstick not meant for me on her collarbones. And the wedding ring. It became a collar of shame, a perfect circle that reminded me every day what I was too slow to leave, too stubborn to abandon. I still wore it. She noticed, of course. One morning, she passed me in the hallway in nothing but Daniel's shirt and said, "You're the only man I know who'd wear his own leash." I didn't respond, just adjusted the cuff of my sleeve, covering the ring with my watch. She laughed as she walked away. "So dignified, Robert. It's almost adorable." Melissa called later that day. She didn't know I'd just spent 30 minutes sitting in my car outside the office, staring at the dashboard as if it held the answer to anything. Her voice was calm as always. "Your signature's missing from the Eastern brief. Did you want me to hold it?" "No," I said. "I'll come sign it." She hesitated. Then, "Are you okay?" That stopped me. No one had asked me that in a long time. "I'm fine," I said. She didn't argue, just said, "Bring coffee." So I did. When I entered her office, she was sketching something on the back of a notepad, a pattern, spirals that led into one another like a maze folding in on itself. "Stress doodles," she said, glancing up. "Don't analyze it." Too late. I handed her the coffee. She accepted it, wrapping both hands around the cup. "I always wondered," she said, tapping her pen against the spiral, "how people survive long betrayals, not the sudden ones, but the slow ones, the ones that rot you over time." "You don't survive it," I said. "You adapt to the rot." She watched me. I watched her back. "You're not angry," she observed. "I am," I said quietly. "But anger is loud. I prefer results." Melissa nodded. "That's what makes you dangerous." For the first time in a long time, I smiled. That evening, we stayed late reviewing files. She sat across from me in the boardroom, her glasses slipping down her nose, hair falling out of her bun in quiet rebellion. "I used to study art," she said suddenly. I looked up. "Really?" "Architecture, before law. I liked the logic behind beauty, clean lines, strong foundations." I folded my hands. "What changed?" "Life, responsibility, family expectations." "You regret it?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but regret is like painting over damp walls. Sooner or later, the mold shows." I chuckled. "That's poetic." Melissa tilted her head. "You still love her?" "I loved who I thought she was." "And now?" "I'm studying the architecture of collapse." That made her pause. "You speak in metaphors." "Only when I'm trying not to bleed." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't beg to be broken. Later that night, I returned home to find Margaret asleep on the living room couch, TV still playing reruns of some dating show she binge-watched to pass the time. I stood there, watching her. She looked younger in sleep, less cruel, less calculating. But then the blanket shifted and I saw Daniel's blazer hanging from the armrest. And the illusion broke. I turned away, walked into the guest room, and opened my laptop. At 2:13 a.m., I received an email from an anonymous proxy. Attached were surveillance photos from Margaret's last business trip, her on the balcony of a resort, legs wrapped around Daniel, his hands somewhere they shouldn't be. The timestamp was on our anniversary. I stared at it for a long time, then I closed the laptop. Removed my wedding ring, and placed it carefully inside a black velvet box I'd kept from our engagement, then I locked it away. That was the last time I wore it. Daniel showed up at my office uninvited, sweating through his blazer, eyes bloodshot, tie crooked like he'd tried to pull himself together and failed halfway through. My assistant tried to block him, but I waved her off. He looked pathetic, and I was curious. He sat across from me, clasping his hands like a boy summoned to the principal's office. I didn't offer him water. "She said she's pregnant," he blurted. I waited. Daniel swallowed hard. "Margaret, she said it's mine." I leaned back. "Congratulations." He didn't smile. "It's not. It can't be." I studied him now, really studied. Explain. His voice cracked as he whispered. I had a vasectomy 2 years ago. I didn't blink. And she doesn't know. He shook his head. She never asked. I didn't tell her because I thought I could trust her. That almost made me laugh. She says she wants to keep it, says I need to take responsibility, that she'll ruin both of us if we don't cooperate. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. Daniel kept talking. I think she's bluffing. I think she's unwell. I turned back. No, Daniel, she's not unwell. She's methodical. He paled. You were just another pawn, same as me once. I moved back to my desk. The difference is, I know how to play the board. He looked at me, confused, maybe even scared. What are you going to do? I smiled, just enough for him to feel the chill. Fix it. Daniel left, visibly shaken. As he exited the hall, Melissa stepped in. She'd been watching from the glass pane, arms folded, lips pressed together. He tell you about the pregnancy? I raised a brow. You heard that? I hear everything in this building. She approached my desk. And I checked the HR logs. Margaret hasn't been to a clinic, no insurance claims, no prenatal tests. She's lying. I know. Then why not confront her? I slid open the drawer beside me and pulled out a white box. Inside was a necklace, rose gold, minimal design. A locket. Inside the locket, an engraved word, unfaithful. I snapped it shut. Because I want her to wear it first. Melissa didn't flinch. Is that wise? I met her gaze. She branded me for 3 years, let her see what it feels like. She didn't stop me. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a file on the table. Here's a list of Liu Corporation's subsidiaries, the ones she controls with hush contracts. They're bleeding funds through dummy vendors. I traced them back to Daniel's name, shell companies. I looked at the pages, line after line of clever theft, masked as corporate noise. You did all this today? She nodded. I thought you might be ready. I was. She added, and I'm in, whatever you're planning. I set the necklace down. That makes you my accomplice. Melissa stared at me. Only if we get caught. The tension in the room shifted then, not romantic, not yet, but heavy. She stepped back. If you need anything else. I stopped her with one word. Dinner. She blinked. I clarified. As thanks for your work. She considered me for a beat, then nodded. Tonight? 7th? She turned to leave. At the door, she paused. You'll have to remove that, she said, gesturing lightly toward my ring finger. I looked down at the ring. That, I said, it's coming off tonight. And it did. That evening, I returned home to find Margaret lounging in the master bedroom, applying red lipstick in front of her mirror. She wore a silk robe tied just loose enough to pretend she didn't care. I walked in holding the white box. Robert, she said without looking up. You're home early. I placed the box on her vanity. She frowned. What's this? A gift. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious but greedy. She opened it and froze. Her smile flickered. She lifted the necklace, read the word, and laughed. You think this is funny? I didn't smile. I think it's accurate. She stood. I'm pregnant. You're not. You can't prove that. I don't need to. Daniel already did. Her jaw locked. He talked? Of course he did. You chose a coward. She stepped closer, voice icy. I could still destroy you. You already tried. Then, without ceremony, I pulled off my wedding ring and dropped it into the box where the necklace had been. She stared. I said, Here, keep it. A matching set. Her voice cracked. You'd throw away this marriage? I looked around the room. The room where she'd slept with other men, where she'd whispered lies, where she laughed in my face for years. There was no marriage, I said. Only paperwork. She stepped forward, hand raised, maybe to slap me, maybe to beg. I stepped back. I'm done, I said. Then I turned and walked out. My phone buzzed just as I reached the bottom of the stairs. A message from Melissa, at 11 p.m. I'll be there. I didn't reply. But I smiled. The boardroom was quiet, eerily so. 20 chairs surrounded the long obsidian table, each occupied by a face that had once smiled at Margaret, called her visionary, nodded along to her updates while secretly tracking her rise with wary eyes. Now those same faces looked anywhere but at her. Some flipped pages, some sipped water, some stared at their phones with feigned interest. None looked at her directly. I sat at the head of the table. Not her. Me. My chair used to be 2 seats down, always just enough distance to imply importance without influence. But now I sat in the center, my name on the placard, my fingerprints on every document on the table. "Shall we begin?" I said. Margaret sat frozen across from me, her fingers clasped together so tightly the skin turned white. Her expression was unreadable, almost. The CFO cleared his throat. "Per the agenda, we're reviewing irregularities reported in the quarterly filings, specifically transactions routed through satellite entities under Liu Holdings' international arm." I said nothing. I let the evidence speak first. A screen behind me flickered to life. The room dimmed. Spreadsheet rose, company logos, wire transfers, dates, names. Each red circle bloomed like a bullet hole. Daniel Ito. Margaret Liu. Same shell company, same address in the Caymans, repeated over and over, disguised in vendor codes and back-end service contracts. The auditors had already done their work, and Melissa had prepared every frame of this silent indictment. The general counsel looked up. The transfers total just over $8.3 million USD, spread over 8 months. Majority of the funds trace back to Liu Corporation's research grant budgets, which were signed off exclusively by Margaret Liu and Daniel Ito during this period. Margaret still hadn't spoken. The head of compliance finally broke the silence. "These activities constitute direct violation. Of fiduciary duty, securities compliance, and stockholder protection regulations. If the board chooses to escalate, it may require referral to criminal counsel." I turned to her then, finally. "Would you like to explain, Margaret?" Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp and trembling. "You set this up." "No," I said. "You set it up. I just connected the dots. I trusted you. You used me." Her voice cracked. "You weren't supposed to win." I leaned back. "No one wins in marriage, Margaret. We just lose differently." Someone on the board tried to intervene. "Perhaps we should defer this to closed session." "No," I said flatly. "She built this in public. Let her fall in public." I stood and walked slowly around the table. "You siphoned funds, you lied to investors, you manipulated financial projections to inflate quarterly outlooks for stock bonuses, and then, when it started collapsing, you tried to pin it on global supply chain issues." I stopped beside her. "But here's the thing about rot, it always surfaces." She finally broke. "If I hadn't cheated," I blinked. Her voice wavered. "If I hadn't, maybe we could have been happy." I stared at her for a long time, then smiled, cold and sharp. "No," I said. "You would have still sold me out. That's why I married you." She flinched. "To know my enemy's face." She burst into tears then, not the dramatic sobs she'd practiced in social media apology videos, but the dry, fractured gasps of someone who realized too late the room had moved on without them. I turned back to the board. "As of this morning, I've acquired controlling shares through a joint silent partnership with Eastern Crown Trust. I now hold 52.7% of Liu Corporation's voting equity." Gasps rippled across the room. Melissa sat quietly near the legal team, no title plate, no portfolio, just a folder resting on her lap and her gaze fixed on me. Her expression didn't waver. Margaret looked up, mascara bleeding. "This was revenge," she whispered. "No," I said. "This was correction." I nodded to security. 2 men entered the room and approached her chair. She shrank. "Robert, please. You'll receive a copy of the finalized divorce settlement by noon. It will include everything you're entitled to, minus the shares you tried to hide, the properties you tried to forge under Daniel's name, and the apartment in Milan I reclaimed through the Ministry of Finance. Please," she begged now, "don't let them drag me out." I paused. "I'm not." I stepped forward and dropped something in her lap. It was the necklace. Rose gold. The locket engraved with one word: unfaithful. You walk out, I said softly, or you wear that. Her hands shook as she stared at it. She stood. Her heels echoed on the tile as she walked toward the door. No one stopped her. No one thanked her. She didn't turn around. Not once. When the doors closed, I turned back to the table. Meeting adjourned. They stood one by one. No one said much. Except one. As I passed Melissa, she stood and fell into step beside me. She didn't ask where we were going. We exited the building under low winter light, wind tugging at the edges of her coat. In the car, silence settled again. Then she said, "You did it." "No," I replied. "We did it." She looked over. I added, "You were my first ally, that matters." We drove on. At a red light, I looked down at my now bare ring finger. For the first time, it didn't ache. Melissa reached out. She didn't take my hand. She just rested hers beside mine, close, not touching. A choice, a line we hadn't crossed, not yet, but we would. Margaret's name was trending again, but for all the wrong reasons. Her social media profiles had gone dark, her PR firm quit, her lawyer dropped her mid-negotiation, 3 sponsorship deals had been pulled, and a 4th brand scrubbed her face from a billboard before the week was out. Every article ended the same way. Margaret Liu, once hailed as the youngest female executive of Liu Corp, now under investigation for financial misconduct, fraud, and conflict of interest violations. She tried to fight it. Hired a crisis manager. Uploaded a tearful apology video. Claimed she was misled by Daniel, that no woman deserves betrayal from both husband and lover. She turned the ring light low, wore grey sweaters instead of silk, and panned her phone across a bookshelf filled with carefully placed psychology books and framed degrees. But the public didn't buy it. They'd seen the locket. Unfaithful. They'd seen her dragged from the boardroom of her own company, crying without dignity. Seen the audits, the receipts, the anonymous leaks, photos, voicemails, her name buried in offshore tax documents next to Daniel Ito's. And Daniel? He'd disappeared for a while, then re-emerged on a live stream, eyes sunken, in a hoodie too big for his frame, begging his followers for donations to start his healing journey. His comments were filled with, "Is this your villain origin story? Bro, Margaret left you bankrupt and snipped. You fumbled a corporate queen and a golden goose, twice." Apparently, Daniel had cashed out too soon. The shell companies Margaret created in his name, all linked back to illegal fund routing. He'd signed blindly, thinking she'd protect him. Instead, she flipped the narrative, made him the scapegoat to claw back whatever pity she could. She succeeded in one thing: she ruined them both. I hadn't spoken to either of them since the boardroom, but I wasn't done. On a crisp morning, Melissa and I arrived at the old Liu headquarters for one last appointment. It was formal, a scheduled transfer of the remaining archives, documents, and private files that were still stored in Margaret's locked office. She no longer had access. The court had sealed the doors under litigation hold. I had the keys now. The building was cold and mostly empty. Most of the staff had already been reassigned or let go. The lobby echoed when we walked through it, no laughter, no phones ringing, just silence, the kind that lives in ruins. Margaret's office still had the same tinted glass panels, gold accents, and designer chairs she'd custom ordered. But now the windows were foggy, the once flowering orchid on her shelf was shriveled. Dust curled along the edges of her framed vision statement on the wall. Melissa stood beside me, looking around, then she said, "You still wear expensive shoes, even when stepping over ashes." I smirked. "Habit." She knelt down and opened the cabinet drawers while I moved toward the desk, thumbing through old files, most of which would be shredded. Legal notices, disciplinary referrals, a stack of fake invoices. Then I found it. A velvet ring box, tucked inside the bottom drawer. It was empty, just like her promises. Melissa stood beside me again. "Do you want to keep it?" "No," I said, "but I'll repurpose it." She gave me a look. "You're cryptic again." I reached into my coat and pulled out a much smaller, new box. This one wasn't velvet, It was leather, sleek, unbranded. Melissa blinked. "What is this?" I opened it. Inside, a platinum band, no diamonds, no engraving, just clean, polished metal. Her eyes widened. I spoke before she could. "I don't believe in fairy tales," I said. "I don't believe in soulmates, or destiny, or fireworks." She didn't move. "But I do believe in logic, in choosing someone who doesn't flinch at the truth, someone who walks into fire with their eyes open, someone who sees rot and still stands upright." She stared at me. "You're that someone," I finished. "So I'm asking you, not for love, not for a promise, just for this, stay in the game with me." I held out the ring. Melissa reached out, slowly, fingers grazing the metal. Then she curled her hand around it. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You call that a proposal?" "I call it a merger," I said, "with terms subject to negotiation." She laughed. The sound filled the empty office like warmth through frost. "Do I get stock options?" "Equal distribution, with buyout rights after 10 years. She slipped the ring into her pocket. "I'll draft the paperwork." Smart woman. Dangerous man. We walked out together. I handed the building key to the security officer on our way down. Outside, the wind tugged at Melissa's coat. She reached for my arm, subtle, not possessive. Natural. As we stepped onto the sidewalk, I caught our reflection in the glass of the lobby's dark windows. The same pose as the photo from my wedding day. But this time, I wasn't pretending. This time, I didn't have to bow to anyone, not a wife, not a lover, not an audience waiting to pity me. I had power, and beside me was someone who never asked me to kneel. I looked down at Melissa. "Hungry?" She nodded. "Starving. Let's eat." The city swallowed us. No spotlight, no applause, just steps moving forward, one after another. No more pretending, just motion, and silence, and the truth.